In Pereira, rescuers spent 12 hours cutting a hole through a collapsed building to reach one woman's pinned arm. They got her out alive. Her name is Daniela Largo. A doctor climbed into the rubble to give her intravenous fluids and keep her stable while crews worked. When they finally carried her out wrapped in a blue blanket, firefighters embraced each other and the crowd outside cheered. That same day, in the same city, a man was carried out of another building under a white blanket. That is what this earthquake looks like right now. Hour by hour, building by building. And the distance between those two outcomes measured in minutes. Today is Thursday, August 13th, 2026. This is day 3, and here is where things stand. Colombia's president, Abelardo de la Espriella, confirmed on Wednesday evening that at least 265 people have died in the magnitude 7.4 earthquake that struck the west of the country on Monday morning. Nearly 500 people are officially listed as missing. But civilian-run databases, volunteers collecting reports from families who cannot find their relatives, put that number at more than 4,100. More than 25,800 families have been affected. And Colombia's Geological Service has now documented 130 aftershocks since Monday. I want to be very clear about something before we go any further, because it shapes everything in this briefing. The death toll has moved constantly. On Monday morning, it was 111. By Monday evening, 132. By Tuesday, 181. By Tuesday night, 224. As of last night, 265. That is not confusion or bad reporting. That is what happens when rescue crews are still pulling people out of buildings. Every number I give you today is a floor, not a ceiling. Let me set the scene properly. The earthquake struck Monday morning at around 8:34 Eastern Time. The epicenter was near San José del Palmar in Chocó province, roughly 250 miles west of Bogotá. The United States Geological Survey put the depth at about 107 kilometers, roughly 66 miles down. The Colombian Geological Service has confirmed it as the strongest earthquake recorded in Colombia in the 21st century. Around 10.5 million people experienced strong to very strong shaking. It was felt in Bogotá, all the way north to Barranquilla on the Caribbean coast, and across the borders into Ecuador and Panama. A magnitude 5.0 aftershock followed less than an hour later. At least 21 more came within hours of that. Now, if you are watching this from outside Colombia, I want to explain why the location matters so much, because it is not obvious from a map. The quake hit what Colombians call the Eje Cafetero, the coffee axis. It is a mountainous, densely populated, culturally central region, and it is one of the engines of Colombia's economy. This is where a very large share of the country's coffee comes from. If you drink Colombian coffee, it likely came from the ground that is now covered in rubble. And this region has been here before. In 1999, a magnitude 6.2 earthquake near the city of Armenia in the same coffee axis killed more than 1,100 people. Many of the people digging through debris this week are old enough to remember that one. I am going to take you through this city by city. And there is one detail in the reporting that I think matters more than the death toll itself. One that tells you the number we have is almost certainly not the real number. I will get to it near the end. Let's start with Pereira, because Pereira is where the title of this briefing comes from, and it has recorded some of the heaviest losses in the country. Pereira sits in the Risaralda department, and it was one of 5 capital cities placed under red alert. Colombia's highest disaster level. As of Monday evening, the Colombian Association of Capital Cities reported 60 deaths in Pereira alone. The highest single city figure at that point. The city's mayor, Mauricio Salazar, described a massive quantity of collapsed buildings with many more people trapped underneath. One detail from Pereira that has stayed with me. 16 people were trapped inside the city's aerial cable car system when the shaking started. They hung there for 6 hours before being evacuated. 6 hours suspended above a city, feeling aftershocks with no way down. The airport in Pereira is closed. So are the airports in Manizales, Quibdó, Armenia, Cartago, and Buenaventura, 7 in total. Suspended while engineers carry out structural inspections. Across the coffee region, authorities have converted sports arenas, schools, and other public buildings into shelters for thousands of displaced people. In Pereira and in Cali, families are sleeping in parks. Some because they no longer have a home. Others because their home is still standing, but they are too frightened of aftershocks to go back inside it. Now let's move to Cali, Colombia's third largest city in the Valle del Cauca department. Cali may have been hit as hard as anywhere. Local officials reported at least 20 buildings completely collapsed and 380 more damaged. The city's mayor said at least 188 people were listed as missing there. Among the collapsed structures were the pediatric and neonatal sections of a hospital. I want to give you a moment on that because it is the kind of detail that gets read past in a list. Those are the wards for children and for newborn babies. Patients evacuated from damaged clinics in Cali are now lying in beds set up inside a school gymnasium. On Wednesday afternoon, Cali's mayor, Alejandro Eder, told reporters that rescue teams were still finding signs of people alive under the rubble. His words were that the next 20 hours were the most critical to find and rescue people alive, and that every minute was vital. He said that yesterday afternoon. Those 20 hours have now passed. There is also a story out of Buenaventura, near Cali, that has received almost no attention. The earthquake caused a fire at a jail there. At least 4 people died and 2 more were hospitalized. Ebert Jonathan Morales, a resident of Cali, described what happened to his home, that it was completely destroyed, that they cannot live there, that the floor collapsed, the walls cracked, and the roof came down. Manizales, Armenia, and Quibdó are also under red alert and have sustained significant damage. Hospitals, roads, transport networks, aqueducts, power, and telecommunications have all been disrupted across the worst affected areas. Now, let me pause and explain something technical, because a lot of people have been asking a reasonable question. How did a very deep earthquake cause this much destruction? Generally speaking, depth protects you. An earthquake 107 kilometers down has to send its energy through a great deal of rock before it reaches anybody, and that rock absorbs a large amount of it. A shallow magnitude 6 can be far more destructive at the surface than a deep magnitude 7. Suzanne van der Lee, a seismologist at Northwestern University, offered part of the explanation. She pointed to the combination of the sheer magnitude, the fact that this was inland rather than offshore, and the strike-slip motion of the fault, and noted that those factors together may have amplified the damage in populated valleys despite the considerable depth. And that phrase, populated valleys, is doing a lot of work. When seismic waves travel from hard bedrock into a valley filled with softer sediment, they slow down and their amplitude increases. The shaking gets stronger and it lasts longer. Cities built in valleys, and the cities of the coffee axis are built in valleys, can experience significantly worse shaking than the hills right beside them. That is a large part of why a quake this deep flattened buildings this thoroughly. Rodrigo Leon Loya, a seismologist and geosciences professor at the University of the Andes, was asked whether this could happen again. He said the probability of a similar magnitude event in the same specific area is low, but he would not rule out further seismic activity. His point was that Colombia is full of active fault lines and that the question is not whether it happens again, it is when, and at which of Colombia's other seismic sources. Let's talk about the response because it has been substantial and it has been fast. President de la Espriella declared a national disaster. He has been in office since Friday. He took the oath 3 days before the largest earthquake his country has recorded this century. The United States began landing disaster response teams on Monday and has offered more than $15 million in aid. Mexico sent 2 military aircraft carrying 19.5 tons of non-perishable food and 19 members of its security forces directly to Pereira, with a further 39 tons planned. Mexico also has 255 military specialists and 20 search dogs on standby. Mexican rescue workers are on the rubble in Cali right now. El Salvador's president offered 2 planes carrying 100 tons of aid. Israel is sending an aid delegation. Pope Leo XIV expressed his solidarity and said he is praying for those killed, injured, and affected. 8 organizations that were already working in Chocó, many of them there supporting the 2016 peace accord and responding to ongoing armed violence, were able to pivot to disaster relief almost immediately. Maria Jose Torres, the United Nations resident coordinator in Colombia, said their existing presence on the ground meant their ability to reach people had increased enormously. Now, here is that detail I promised you at the start. And I think it is the most important thing in this entire briefing. The president says nearly 500 people are missing. Civilian-run databases, ordinary volunteers compiling reports from families searching for relatives put the figure above 4,100. That is not a small discrepancy. That is a gap of more than 3,500 people. And here is why I do not think that gap is a mistake. The epicenter was in Chocó. Chocó is one of the poorest regions in Colombia. It is dense jungle. Much of it is reachable only by boat or by small plane. And since Monday, cell service across large parts of it has been down, which means the place closest to the earthquake is the place we know the least about. Giovanni Rizzo, Colombia director for the Norwegian Refugee Council, put it plainly: that this earthquake compounds an already severe humanitarian situation in a region that was already in crisis before the ground moved. So when you see 265 dead reported, understand what that number actually represents. It represents the places where rescuers could get to, where phones work, where someone was able to file a report. It does not yet represent the communities up the rivers in Chocó that nobody has reached. That is the number I will be watching, not the death toll in the cities. The moment somebody gets into Chocó and tells us what is there. So what happens next? Rescue crews are now well past the 72-hour window that aid agencies consider critical for finding survivors. That threshold can extend. People trapped with access to air, water, or an air pocket have survived far longer, and crews in Cali were still detecting signs of life on Wednesday. But the odds narrow with every hour, and at some point in the coming days, this transitions from a rescue operation to a recovery operation. That is a hard moment for every family still waiting. The aftershock sequence is continuing. 130 so far. And more than 25,800 affected families now need shelter, water, food, and medical care through what will be a long recovery. If you want to help, there are organizations confirmed to be operating on the ground right now. World Central Kitchen is serving meals with local partners. And the Norwegian Refugee Council and United Nations agencies were already established in Chocó before the quake. Several major news outlets are also maintaining vetted donation lists. Please give through an established organization rather than an individual fundraiser you cannot verify, because disasters of this scale attract fraud within days. That is not cynicism, it is just what happens. and your money does more good in the right hands. To recap where things stand as of Thursday, August 13th. At least 265 dead. Nearly 500 officially missing, more than 4,100 by civilian count. More than 25,800 families affected. Magnitude 7.4, depth 107 kilometers. Epicenter at San José del Palmar in Chocó. The strongest quake recorded in Colombia this century. 130 aftershocks and counting. Pereira, Cali, Manizales, Quibdó, and Armenia under red alert. 7 airports closed, 20 buildings down in Cali, and 380 damaged, including the children's and newborn wards of a hospital. Thousands sleeping in parks and gymnasiums. International aid arriving from the United States, Mexico, El Salvador, and Israel. And the epicenter itself still largely unreached. Tomorrow, the thing to watch is Chocó. If crews and communications reach those river communities in the next 24 hours, we will find out whether the official missing figure of 500 or the civilian figure of 4,000 is closer to the truth. That single answer will reshape every other number in this story. I will have a full update for you tomorrow as the figures change. If this coverage was useful, please like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one. And to everyone in Pereira, in Cali, in Quibdó, and Manizales. And to every family still standing at the edge of a pile of concrete waiting for news, the world is watching and help is arriving. I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there.